So my wife's RX over here has started making a funny noise and heard it first in a drive-through with the window down. Can't really hear it driving down the road, but we'll figure out what's going on with it. So I started doing some poking and prodding, pulled off my engine cover, and the loudest of my noise I can hear and feel on this front engine bracket here. I can feel it through the handle of the screwdriver as well as hear it with my ear to the screwdriver. I'm using that as kind of a makeshift stethoscope. So I'll probably pull this upper engine mount bracket off and figure out what lives underneath there that might be making our noise. I don't know if there's maybe a water pump that lives right there. Hopefully we won't need to get into the timing components, but we'll see. And I did find multiple TSBs for the vacuum pump leaking, but or vacuum pump making a rattle sound, but the noise is definitely on the passenger side, the front of the engine, not on the rear of the engine, the driver's side. All right, so we got our engine cover removed, and we'll first pull off our ABS unit, which is going to have a couple 12 millimeters around the outside. One of them's hidden kind of up underneath the bracket. See if I can even get a shot at it. It's right down in there. There we go. And then we'll pull this upper mount out of the way, which is going to have some 17 millimeters around the outside of it. And then we'll get into tearing into the rest of this from there. Like I said, we're going to have this engine mount here comes out, and then this main engine bracket will come off. So we'll have to lift the bottom of the engine with a floor jack. And we'll get into this here in just a minute. It should be pretty self-explanatory to get a little bit deeper into this thing, and then we'll take a look at it and figure out for sure if it's our water pump that's making the noise. Alright, so I'm starting to work on pulling the engine mount out of the way so we can get access to the front of this engine. And there are some larger 17 millimeters that are around the perimeter between the black bracket and that silver bracket, and then the silver bracket to the frame. And then there's a couple 17s across the top up here. There, and there. And then I ran into a snag. This upper half of the silver bracket was not coming off of this front timing cover bracket. And then I figured out that there's see if I can even get the camera in here. There's a stud coming up from right there. You can see the nut coming up, sandwiching there. So what I ended up having to do, it's a 14 millimeter nut on a stud. The stud comes down, the nut goes up to the top, and I went from underneath the car up along the fender liner and was able to get at it with a 14 millimeter and a very long extension. It's not super tight, but it's just really awkward to get into here, into this location. So I got that loose, and then now my upper half of my bracket is separating. So I should be able to get the rest of the way out from here. All right, well, we got the main engine mount out of the way, sitting up there on the side of the fuse box over there, and also that little silver aluminum lifting pedestal. So I'm probably going to go ahead and pull out this support bracket on the front of the timing cover just to get a little bit more room. I don't know that it would necessarily need to come out to do a water pump job if that's what we end up doing, but I'm just trying to get enough visibility and access to, in case we end up needing to do that. So I'm going to pull off these, look like about a 14 millimeter around perimeter. It looks like there's 1, 2, a hidden one, third, 4. There's another hidden one under that side, 5. and then one in the center right there, 6. So we'll work on pulling this guy off and see what we look like after that. All right, so now that we've got this bracket and engine mount removed, we have more access to poke around and listen to noises. We'll go ahead and run the engine and see if we can determine a little bit more of a source of the noise here. To me, it still sounds like water pump. So the next step, we will remove the belt from the water pump and go ahead and run the car one more time and see if the noise is gone. And if the noise is gone, then we can pretty well assume it's the water pump making noise. All right, so with the water pump, or with the belt removed, it sounded much quieter already. That's a good thing. That means our chain drive, timing components, all that are good. Yeah, that's a good thing. We're happy with that. All right, so we have determined that we have a water pump making noise based off of our assessment here. So I am going to go ahead and replace the thermostat housing that's also attached to the side, just because this is a 7-year-old plastic, and I have to take it off to get the water pump off. So it just seems to me like it makes sense to just go and replace that guy as well. And I was looking at the instructions on the water pump itself, and I disagree with their tools needed. So I'll show you that here in just a second. So to start on the thermostat housing, we're going to remove our hose clamp there, and we got a hose clamp over here, and then we'll unbolt it once we get our hose clamps and hoses released. All right, I got both my hose clamps out of the way. We're going to use a hose pick in here. This particular one's a snap-on. You can buy lots of different versions of it. They also make different angles depending on what angle you're trying to work on. So I'm going to go with this one. And basically we're going to just slide in here. We're going to just slide the tip of the hose pick in between the hose and the thermostat housing. And we're going to just kind of work our way underneath it there. And work our way all the way around. And this will help that hose from tearing during removal. And once we get it sufficiently loose, we can also use that to help kind of push the hose if we need to. And this guy, I'm going to use a little bit different angle for this one here. All right, it should make sliding the hoses off much easier. All right, so 10 millimeters are removed. There's going to be a bolt on the top, bolt about 6 o'clock or so, maybe 6:30. There's a nut about 4:30, 5 o'clock, and then there's another nut here. All of them are 10 millimeter. And then this guy just comes straight off. Like I said, being thermostat and being all plastic, it just seems to make sense to go ahead and replace this while we're in here, especially since we're going to have it off, and there is a seal here. So we got a new one of those. They're not terribly expensive, and then we'll get access to our water pump. So to do the water pump from here, we'll need to take our pulley off, and this is where I disagree with Lexus's instructions. Lexus's instructions show you to use a screwdriver as a pry bar, which is not recommended. So I'm going to use a spanner wrench in the holes of the pulley instead. So I'll show you what that looks like here in just a second. So this is my adjustable adjustable Matco spanner wrench with different feet. And we're going to put the peg part of it right into the end of the pulley like that. And that will allow us to hold the pulley still while we are breaking our fasteners loose. And this is the kit in case anybody wants to see that. Like I said, it's got quite a few different options of peg sizes as well as some spacers. So super handy to have. And it's not something I use all the time, but in this case, definitely makes sense to use it. So I'll grab a 10mm, we'll break loose our hardware for our pulley and get the pulley out of the way. Well, change of plans. Ended up using an old fan clutch tool, water pump holder tool, just because the space of that spinner wrench in vertically in that space was not really that easy to work on. Also, correction, it is a 12mm on the water pump, not a 10mm. Anyways, all four of them are broken loose, and we'll get the pulley out of here, and then we'll look at the water pump itself. So I got the pulley off, but we're kind of sandwiched in the frame rail where we can't actually get it off the water pump. So that's kind of stupid, but I guess we'll just work around it and pull it off with the pump. I did also have a little bit of play in this idler pulley here. You can see that. I think it has to come off anyways. Should be a 14 on top there. Alrighty, and as I start taking off my hardware for the water pump, I'm going to start on the hardest ones to get to that are going to be working around the water pump pulley itself. So I was able to position the pulley kind of off to the side so I could get to some of the bolts below it and around it on the left-hand side of the water pump area. And like I said, we're going to keep working our way around. We'll get all these bolts out. Some of them do have, the 12mm do have sealant on them. Then it looks like the far top left over here, I'm going to have a 14mm. So we'll have to change sockets to get to that one, and then we'll work back on this side. Get the last of the bolts out. Also, forgot to show you too. So I'm want to make sure I'm getting all the bolts I'm supposed to be getting. And so I open up my new box and have it sitting here so I can look at all the different holes, especially make sure that the ones that are towards the bottom in the car, I'm able to make sure I'm getting those removed before I start prying on it. So even after draining the water pump, or draining the entire cooling system, I'm still got quite a bit of coolant that was trapped on this back side of the water pump over here. So I'm going to let that drain out for a little while into a smaller drain pan. And once it's done dripping, then we'll get the water pump the rest of the way out. The last bolt I have is a 12mm right up against the belt tensioner right there. And like I said, we'll let this thing drain out for a little while and we'll come back. Alright, so I started pulling the gasket off, and it came off in like multiple layers, so make sure you're aware of that you're getting all of it off. So there's like basically a gasket layer and then a stamped steel and then another gasket layer. As like I said, just make sure that you get it all. It is riveted together, but I'll make sure that we're removing all of that before we put it back together and have some new leak. And then also make sure that you get your new pump or new pulley, original pulley centered on your new pump, or at least installed as we go back in it, because we don't want to get this pump all the way back together and torque down and then find out that we forgot to put the pulley on it. And then here is the new pump. So you can see I'm turning it, it's nice and quiet. And here's our original one. So you can hear the bearing noise as well as a little bit of inflay. So there was just a little bit of a seepage on the bottom down there at the weak point. Presumably that pump was getting hot given the bearing failure, so we caught this thing in time. Alright, so looking at our instructions, the smallest bolts are going to be bolts C and D, and then the medium size that are the 12mm are going to be bolts B And then the longest bolts with the 14 millimeter are going to be bolt A. And bolts bolts D are going to get Loctite applied to them. So that's going to be the difference between the short ones that are C and D. So there's a couple that get Loctite on them. So we'll jump into the instructions here and I'll show you what we're looking at. Alright, so I got tired of my laptop turning on, so I just copied it onto a piece of cardboard. But I traced the left half of the gasket, and then I traced the right half of the gasket, and I kind of overlapped them in the middle just to get it all fit on one piece of cardboard. But there's going to be our game plan. So I'm going to probably start with a bolt, probably this 10 millimeter up here, just to make sure my gasket's hanging properly and in the correct location. And then I'll probably start one down here somewhere. And again, we're wanting to make sure we hand start every bolt before we start tightening anything down. And then the 10 millimeter and this 10 millimeter are going to be the ones that get Loctite on them. So just want to make a point of that. That's why they have a star next to it. Everything else is pretty straightforward. The bolts did have quite a bit of sealant on them. My camera will focus. So my plan is to leave the sealant as is. I don't think it's worth trying to clean it all off. It's not going to hurt anything if it was there to begin with. So just want to make mention of that. So we'll get this thing, start going back together. I did already wiggle the pump down into the hole. And I do have the pulley sitting on the face of the water pump at the moment. Once I get my outer bolts started that kind of locate my water pump in the correct position, then I'll go ahead and pop the pulley off so I can move it around in respect to the shaft. And then we'll get the rest of the bolts started. All right, so I got all the bolts started. Now, before we actually start tightening things down, it's worth inspecting along this top edge. Make sure that the gasket is actually installed properly. You don't have any kind of weird alignment issues or folding or anything like that. Obviously, we can't see the whole entire thing, but as long as we were careful with it going on and the gasket is located on the top, it's probably going to be located on the bottom. So my next step is going to be torquing things down. I will probably do I don't know if there's actually an order. Let me see if there's an order in the instructions here. So it's not like a numbered order, but it looks like we would go A through D, the way the instructions are worded. So we're going to go our largest bolts first, our 14 millimeters, and then work our way through the 12s, and then work our way through the 10s. Well, I got my two A bolt 14 millimeters tightened down to 32 foot-pounds, and prior to doing that, I decided I was going to snug down my B bolts, the 12 millimeters. Given this is such a long assembly, I kind of wanted to have it at least make sure it was completely flat and had some sort of bow to it or something like that prior to torquing it down. So I just kind of snugged them down, nowhere near torque by any means, just flat. So now we'll go back and do our B bolts that are 15 foot-pounds. All right, so space was really tight on that bottom, on this bolt on the bottom, up against where the pulley is. So I ended up swapping to go to my 1/4 inch torque wrench. Unfortunately, this one only does inch-pounds or Newton meters, so I converted my torque specs. On my 15 is 180 inch-pounds, and 8 foot-pounds can be 96. So I got all my 12 millimeters are torqued down, and next we'll do the C bolts, and then we'll finally end up on the D bolts. And so we've got, looks like 5 C bolts, and then 2 D bolts. Now, I did want to make mention, there are some additional holes that don't get bolts. Those two are where the thermostat housing gets torqued down. And when you look at the water pump itself, you'll notice that where the bolts go have a raised portion or a higher pedestal. and where the bolts don't go are a little flatter. So like this guy gets a bolt, but this guy doesn't because of the height difference. So just something to look for there. And we'll get the C-bolts tightened down next. And real quick, here's my part numbers for my idler pulley and my thermostat housing. You're welcome to pause the video and check those out. We're going to go ahead and do the we'll do this thermostat house. Oh, we'll do the idler pulley first, then we'll do thermostat housing next. But we'll do. I don't know. Maybe it's worth doing the pump. Well, we might start with the indecisive here, but we might start with the water pump pulley itself first, just for clearances, because that was kind of a pain to get that in there, or get it off, I should say. All right, so I decided to do the water pump pulley first. Unfortunately, there's really not any room in there to put a torque wrench on there. So I used my same fan water pump holding tool. So I have basically 2 bolts in it like that, with counter leverage pushing counterclockwise, and then I use my 12 millimeter long handle ratchet wrench to tighten the 3rd bolt that's out here, and then I just kept rotating around. So if you can picture the bolts like that, basically. Not sure the best way to show you that, but yeah, that was probably the worst spot clearance wise, and unfortunately not able to put a real torque on it. So we're just going to kind of go with our our experience, our intuition, our feel, and like I said, then we'll do our idler pulley next, followed by our thermostat housing. Like I said, our old one had a little bit of scoring marks on it and had a little bit of in play in the bearing. There's our brand new one. Man, this thing is bling bling compared to the condition of our old one. That's wild looking. How a little bit of heat on it, and like I said, we'll get this thing replaced and move on to reassembling the rest of this engine. All right, so we got the belt installed. The belt installed down in there. I was a little bit harder than it needed to be. I probably would have done the thermostat housing after doing the belt if I had to do this again. So we're ready to start adding our engine mount bracket, and we'll have to look up some more torque specs for that. Alright, so we're getting ready to put this front bracket back on. I had a heck of a time trying to find the instructions for it, but here's my notes on that one. This is the long bolt that has to be installed already slotted into the bolt hole of the bracket before we install it. This is going to be the kind of brass one that's a little bit shorter. So the bottom 3 here are longer ones that are labeled as A. This is the next longest one, and then we have our 2 short ones are out here, and then one more long one over there. Anyways, they are numbered in sequence of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. All of them are going to get torqued to 40 foot-pounds. We're going to do that real quick, and then we'll be ready to finish reinstalling the rest of the bracket engine mount stuff over here. All right, we're wrapping this thing up here. So we've got all of the 17 millimeters are going to be 52 foot-pounds. The 14 millimeter nut on the bottom is 40 foot-pounds. That one's going to be basically impossible to torque just because of how long that extension is, so just get it tight. Like I said, we'll get the rest of our little brackets put in here. We'll fill it up with coolant and move on. So I got all my ABS unit back together, and we'll get this thing filled up with coolant. So we'll grab the coolant or vacuum filler. We'll pull vacuum on the cooling system, and then we'll refill it. So it's a snap-on Venturi vacuum filler. We're running air across it, pulling a vacuum out of the system. All right, so shut off the air supply. We're sufficiently deep into vacuum. So I've got a gallon of Toyota Long Life full strength. So they sell you pre-mix, or you can buy full strength. Here in Texas, we don't get cold enough to really need more than about 30, 70, 40, 60 kind of mix. So we'll do coolant, and then we got distilled water to top off the system with. So I'm going to basically, I'll put in about 2/3 of this, and then we'll add a gallon of water as needed. And then we'll keep a little bit of extra. I think that'll probably get us pretty close to full capacity on this car. So we'll see how this goes here. So open our suction line. Oh, there's not a sight glass on here. That's not cool. And finally, we'll move got most of that out, and we'll move over to our water side here. We'll flush out. The nice thing about doing it that way is we also flush out the tool of any coolant in it, so the tool stays cleaner for longer. All right, we got coolant in the car, and we're gonna open the garage door up and make sure we're not causing any sort of issues in here. But we're gonna go ahead and do a test fire on the car and inspect the belt to make sure it is properly installed and doesn't have any issues. And we'll go take it for a quick spin and make sure everything works like it's supposed to. So as we drive this thing and we get it up to operating temperature, I also set the heat to maximum inside the car. We'll drive with the heat on for a few minutes, and then we'll transition back over to cooler air. All right, a couple successful miles on this guy, and we're happy with it. And yeah, overall this job wasn't terrible. Was kind of a little surprising to hear it making noise, but you know, it is what it is. So glad we got it taken care of when we did, and appreciate y'all watching a video of mine, and I will catch you in the next one.